Maggie sat at the kitchen table, staring down at the half-empty cup of coffee in front of her. The steam had long since disappeared, leaving only the bitter remnants of a morning she didn't care to remember. It had been a week since her father's funeral, a week since she'd buried the last of the family she had left. Her mother, long gone, had left behind only memories Maggie preferred not to think about. Now, she was alone. The silence of her small apartment felt suffocating, the kind of silence that pressed against you, weighed on your chest. Maggie had never been one to feel haunted by her own thoughts, but lately, there was something about the emptiness that felt off. She couldn't place it. That's when she first saw him. It had been an ordinary Tuesday, and she'd gone to the grocery store like she always did, pushing her cart, picking up the same items week after week. It was nothing out of the ordinary until she felt it, that strange sensation creeping up the back of her neck. She paused in the aisle, her hand hovering over a box of cereal, and turned around. The man was standing at the end of the aisle just beyond the corner. At first, he didn't seem all that strange, just another person. Maybe a little too still, but nothing to be alarmed about. Until she saw his face, a disfigured smile. It stretched far too wide, jagged like the rictus of a corpse that hadn't been properly buried. His lips pulled back unnaturally, exposing teeth that weren't just crooked, but seemed to be wrong, too sharp, too much. And his eyes, wide, blank, and fixed on her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. Maggie's heart skipped a beat. Her hand tightened around the cart, and she tried to look away, but the smile held her in place. Her breath came quicker, shallow. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, he was gone, vanished into the crowd. She blinked, shaking her head. The man couldn't have been real. Stress from work, maybe. The weight of grief had been pressing on her ever since her father's passing. But as she turned back to the cereal, her thoughts kept circling back to that smile. It lingered in her mind, like the faintest echo of a nightmare. That night, Maggie tried to forget about it. She watched TV. She checked her email. But the image of the man, that smile, wouldn't leave her. She couldn't shake it. It was as if his grin had burned itself into her mind, and every time she closed her eyes, it was there, waiting. The next day, she saw him again, this time in the library. Maggie was browsing through the shelves, trying to lose herself in the mundane task of selecting a book. Her fingers brushed against the spines of novels she didn't care to read when she felt that old sensation, eyes on her. She turned. There he was, standing between two bookshelves, staring at her. His smile, that same twisted, horrible grin, stretched wider than before, as if it were growing, feeding off her fear. This time, he didn't vanish. He didn't turn away or move into the crowd. He just stood there, staring, his smile never faltering. Maggie backed away, her heart racing, but the man didn't move. She ran out of the library, her breath coming in gasps, her mind screaming that she was losing her grip on reality. He couldn't be real. He couldn't be. But she knew that something was terribly wrong. And then it started happening at home. She'd be sitting in her living room, watching TV or reading, and she'd feel it. A coldness in the air, a shift in the atmosphere. Then, there he'd be, standing just outside the corner of her vision. She never saw him come in, never heard him, but he was always there, watching her with that same unnerving smile. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she'd wake to find him standing in the doorway of her bedroom, his eyes glowing in the dark, that smile stretching wider than she could bear. Her phone rang one night. She picked it up. half expecting it to be her sister, or maybe her best friend, offering some kind of comfort. But it wasn't anyone she knew. The voice on the other end was distorted, rough, like it was coming through static. "He's been waiting," the voice said, before it hung up. The man. He's been waiting. Maggie's mind raced. She was certain she knew that voice, but she couldn't place it. It sounded like a memory she had buried deep. Something from her past, her childhood. Then it clicked. It had been years ago. A neighborhood boy, a friend of her brother's, a missing person case. The police had found nothing. No sign of the kid, no trace, just a cold case, like so many others. But Maggie had never really thought about it until now. Not until she saw the man with the smile. The boy's name was Jeremy. Jeremy was the one who had disappeared, the one who'd never been found, the one who had been lost when Maggie and her brother had been playing near the woods that day, the one who they'd never told anyone about, who they'd never told the police about. It wasn't just a coincidence. The man with the smile wasn't just some stranger. He was Jeremy. And Jeremy wasn't smiling because he wanted to. He was smiling because he wanted something back. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. The memory, so old, so hidden, flooded her mind. The guilt, the fear, the knowledge that they'd been the ones responsible for what happened to him. And now Jeremy had returned, twisted by the years, by the silence, by the wrong that had been done. He wasn't just haunting her. He was seeking revenge. The smile was no longer just a reflection of the past. It was the price she would have to pay. And Maggie realized, with a sudden, sickening clarity, that the man wasn't going away. Not until he got what he wanted. He had all the time in the world. And Maggie, as much as she wished she could hide, knew there was nowhere left to run.